I never imagined I'd be standing in a church, staring at a closed casket, my hands trembling as I clutched a crumpled tissue. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the muffled sobs of family and friends. But all I could hear was the echo of my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears. My son, my only child, was gone, and the world felt suddenly hollow, as if someone had sucked all the color and sound from it. I tried to focus on the eulogy, on the kind words spoken about him, but my mind kept drifting to the last time I saw his smile, the warmth of his hug. It's the way he used to call me Mom, with that teasing lilt in his voice. As the service dragged on, I felt a coldness settle over me, a numbness that was almost a relief. I barely registered the people who came to offer their condolences, their faces blurring together in a haze of grief. My daughter-in-law Emily stood beside me, her eyes red and swollen, her hand gripping mine a little too tightly. I wanted to comfort her, to believe we were united in our loss. But something about her felt off, too composed, too rehearsed. I pushed the thought away, telling myself it was just the shock. Then, as the final hymn played and I reached for my phone to silence it, a message flashed across the screen from an unknown number. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words. "I'm alive. Don't trust my wife." For a moment, the room spun. Was this some cruel joke? Or was my nightmare only just beginning? I had no idea, but I knew one thing for certain: nothing about this day was what it seemed. From the moment I first held Daniel in my arms, I knew my life would never be the same. He was a bright, curious child, always asking questions, always wanting to know how things worked. I remember the way he'd tug at my sleeve in the grocery store, his big brown eyes wide with wonder as he pointed out the colors of the fruit or the patterns on the cereal boxes. He was my world, my anchor, the reason I pushed through the hardest days after his father left us. We were a team, just the two of us against the world. And I cherished every moment of our little adventures. As Daniel grew older, our bond only deepened. He was the kind of son who never forgot my birthday, who called just to check in, who made me feel seen and valued even when the rest of the world seemed to pass me by. When he went off to college, I felt the ache of his absence. But I was so proud of the man he was become, kind, driven, and fiercely loyal. He made friends easily, but he always made time for me, inviting me to his apartment for dinner or sending me photos of his latest culinary disasters. I loved those moments, the laughter and the easy conversation, the sense that no matter how far he went, he'd always come back to me. Then he met Emily. I remember the first time he brought her home, how nervous he seemed, how eager he was for me to like her. Emily was beautiful, poised and polite, almost too polite. She smiled at all the right moments, asked about my hobbies, and complimented my cooking. But there was a distance in her eyes, a carefulness that made me uneasy. I tried to brush it off as my own overprotectiveness, telling myself that no one would ever be good enough for my son. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about her didn't quite add up. Their relationship moved quickly. Within a year, they were engaged, and soon after, married in a small ceremony that felt more like a business transaction than a celebration of love. Daniel seemed happy, or at least he said he was, but I noticed subtle changes in him. He called less often, stopped sharing the little details of his life, and seemed distracted when we did talk. Emily, for her part, became more controlling, insisting on handling all the wedding arrangements, making decisions about their home, even managing Daniel's finances. I tried to voice my concerns, but Daniel brushed them off, assuring me that Emily just liked to be organized. The months leading up to Daniel's death were a blur of missed calls and unanswered texts. He seemed to be pulling away, and every time I asked if he was okay, he insisted he was just busy with work. I wanted to believe him, but the worry gnawed at me, especially after he canceled our annual mother-son weekend for the first time in 10 years. Emily called to explain, her voice smooth and apologetic, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Then, one rainy afternoon, I got the call that shattered my world. Emily's voice was frantic as she told me Daniel had been in an accident, that he was gone. The details were vague, the story rushed, but in my shock and grief, I didn't question it. I just let myself be swept away by the pain, clinging to the memories of the boy I'd raised, the man I'd loved so fiercely. Now, standing at his funeral with that message burning in my mind, I couldn't help but wonder, had I missed the signs? Had I failed to protect him when he needed me most? The message haunted me, replaying in my mind with every breath I took. I'm alive. Don't trust my wife. I tried to convince myself it was a cruel prank, some sick joke from a stranger who'd gotten my number from the obituary. But the words burrowed under my skin, refusing to let me grieve in peace. I kept glancing at Emily, searching her face for any sign of guilt or deception, but she was a master of composure. She wept at all the right moments, accepted condolences with a trembling voice, and clung to me as if we were united in our heartbreak. Yet every time her eyes met mine, I felt a chill run down my spine. After the funeral, as people filtered out of the church, I found myself watching Emily more closely. She seemed oddly preoccupied, her phone never far from her hand. When I asked if she needed help with the arrangements, she brushed me off, insisting she had everything under control. "You should rest, Mom," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Let me handle the paperwork and the insurance. Daniel would want you to take care of yourself." The way she said it, so practiced, so final made my skin prickle. Daniel had always been the one to handle his own affairs. He hated paperwork, always joked about how he'd be lost without me to remind him about bills and deadlines. Why was Emily so eager to take charge now? That night, I lay awake in the guest room of their house, staring at the ceiling and listening to the rain tapping against the window. I couldn't sleep, not with the weight of that message pressing on my chest. I scrolled through old texts from Daniel, searching for clues, for anything that might explain what was happening. His last few messages were short, almost rushed. "Busy. Mom, call you soon. And Emily says hi." It wasn't like him. He always took the time to check in, to ask about my day, to share a joke or a story. The silence between us in those final weeks felt suddenly sinister. The next morning, I found Emily in the kitchen, making coffee. She looked up, her eyes puffy but alert. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, her tone sympathetic. I shook my head, watching as she poured 2 cups and slid one across the counter to me. "I know this is hard," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "But we have to be strong for Daniel. He wouldn't want us to fall apart." I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, my doubts were growing. As the days passed, little things began to stand out. Emily was quick to shut down any conversation about the accident, insisting it was too painful to discuss. When I asked about the police report, she said she hadn't received it yet, that the authorities were handling everything. She avoided eye contact when I pressed for details, her answers vague and rehearsed. I caught her on the phone late. At night, her voice hushed and urgent, but when I entered the room, she hung up abruptly and claimed it was just a friend checking in. One afternoon, I found myself alone in Daniel's study. The room was untouched, his favorite books still stacked. On the desk, his jacket draped over the chair. I ran my fingers over the spines, searching for comfort. But instead I found a stack of unopened mail bills, bank statements, and a letter from his employer marked urgent. My heart pounded as I realized none of these had been opened. If Emily was handling everything, why were these left untouched? That evening, I confronted her, my voice shaking. "Emily, I found some mail in Daniel's office. Shouldn't we go through it together?" She stiffened, her eyes narrowing for just a moment before she forced a smile. "I was going to get to it," she said, her tone clipped. "There's just been so much to do." I nodded, but the tension between us was palpable. I could feel her watching me, measuring my every move. The unease grew with each passing day. Friends and family began to notice, their condolences tinged with awkwardness as they sensed the strain between us. I tried to confide in my sister, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain the feeling that my son's death wasn't what it seemed? That his wife, the woman he'd chosen, might be hiding something terrible? I was terrified of sounding paranoid, of letting my grief twist reality into something unrecognizable. But the message on my phone was a constant reminder. I'm alive. Don't trust my wife. I couldn't ignore it, not when every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. I started to keep a journal, jotting down every odd detail. Every strange interaction. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I had to find the truth even if it meant tearing my family apart. And as I watched Emily move through the house, her every gesture calculated and controlled, I realized I was no longer just grieving. I was searching, desperate for answers, and terrified of what I might find. It was a Thursday evening when everything finally snapped. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I'd spent the day pacing, replaying every conversation with Emily, every odd glance, every unanswered question. The message on my phone felt like a ticking bomb in my pocket. Couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, even if it meant shattering the fragile peace that remained between us. Emily was in the living room, curled up on the couch with her laptop open, pretending to work. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. "Emily," I said, my voice sharper than I intended, "we need to talk." She looked up, her expression carefully blank. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I want to know what really happened to Daniel. Want to see the police report. Want to know why you're handling everything alone, why you're shutting me out. And I want to know who you keep calling late at night." For a split second, something flickered in her eyes, fear, maybe, or anger. But she recovered quickly, setting her laptop aside and folding her hands in her lap. "I understand you're grieving," she said, her voice low and controlled. "But you're letting your imagination get the best of you. Daniel is gone. I wish it weren't true, but it is. I'm just trying to protect you from more pain." I shook my head, my frustration boiling over. "Protect me, or protect yourself, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're hiding something. Daniel would never have left things this way. He would have called me. He would have made sure I was okay. And now I'm getting messages from someone claiming to be him. Someone who says he's alive and that I shouldn't trust you." Her face went pale, her composure finally cracking. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I pulled out my phone and showed her the message. She stared at it, her hands shaking. "This is sick," she said, her voice rising. "Someone is playing a cruel joke on you. You need to let this go for both our sakes." But I couldn't let it go. Not now. If it's a joke, then why are you so nervous? Why haven't you shown me any proof? Why do you keep avoiding my questions? She stood up abruptly, her eyes blazing. "Because I'm tired, okay? I'm tired of being accused of being watched. Like a criminal in my own home. I loved Daniel. I lost him too. You're not the only one grieving." Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. For a moment, I almost believed her. But then I remembered the unopened mail, the late-night phone calls, the way she flinched every time I mentioned the accident. I realized I couldn't trust her, not with my son's memory, and certainly not with the truth. "I'm going to the police," I said quietly. "I want to see the report for myself. And if you have nothing to hide, you won't stop me." She stared at me, her jaw clenched, but she didn't argue. Instead, she turned away, her shoulders rigid with anger or fear, I couldn't tell which. I left the room, my hands shaking, but my resolve stronger than ever. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at Daniel's old desk, sifting through his things, searching for anything that might make sense of the chaos. That's when I found it, a small, battered notebook tucked behind a stack of papers. Inside, in Daniel's handwriting, was a list of dates and names, some circled, some crossed out. At the bottom of the last page, he'd written, "If anything happens to me, look for the blue key." My breath caught. A blue key. I had never seen one. Was it a clue? A warning? Suddenly, the message on my phone didn't feel like a prank at all. It felt like a lifeline. I realized, with a jolt of fear and hope, that my son might truly be alive and that the real story was only just beginning. The days that followed were a blur of confrontation and confusion, as if the world I'd known had been turned inside. Outward of my suspicions spread quickly, faster than I could have imagined. Emily, whether out of fear or anger, confided in her parents and a few close friends, painting me as a grieving mother, unraveling under the weight of loss. Suddenly, I was no longer just mourning my son. I was fighting to defend my sanity. My sister, Linda, was the first to call. Her voice was gentle, but I could hear the worry beneath her words. "Are you sure about this?" she asked after I told her everything: the text, the notebook, the blue key. I know you're hurting, but sometimes grief makes us see things that aren't there. I wanted to scream to make her understand that this was more than just a mother's desperation. But all I could do was repeat the facts, my voice growing smaller with each retelling. Emily, meanwhile, became colder, more distant. She moved through the house like a ghost, barely speaking to me except when absolutely necessary. When we did cross paths, her eyes were hard, her words clipped. "You're making things worse for everyone," she hissed one morning, her voice low so the neighbors wouldn't hear. "Daniel is gone. You need to accept that." But I couldn't, not with the evidence mounting, not with the feeling in my gut that something was terribly wrong. The rest of the family began to take sides. Some, like my cousin Mark, believed me without question. "You always said Emily was hiding something," he reminded me, his voice fierce with loyalty. "If Daniel reached out, we have to find him." Others, like my own mother, were less convinced. "You're chasing ghosts," she said, her eyes full of pity. "Let him rest, sweetheart. You're only hurting yourself." The tension seeped into every interaction, poisoning even the simplest conversations. At a family dinner, what should have been a moment of comfort turned into a battleground. Emily sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, her smile brittle. I tried to keep the peace, but every word felt loaded, every glance a silent accusation. When I mentioned the police report, Emily's father slammed his fork down, his face red with anger. "You're tearing this family apart," he spat. "Is that what you want?" I left the table in tears, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and despair. I felt utterly alone, trapped between my need for answers and the growing certainty that I was losing everyone I loved. Even my closest friends began to pull away, unsure how to support me. "Maybe you just need time," one of them suggested gently, her eyes darting away from mine. "Maybe you're not ready to say goodbye." But I couldn't let go, not when. I kept finding more questions than answers. The blue key Daniel had mentioned in his notebook became an obsession. I tore the house apart, searching for it, rifling through drawers, boxes, even the pockets of his old jackets. Emily caught me once, her face twisted with fury. "You're invading his privacy," she snapped. "You're not the only one who lost him." The emotional toll was immense. I barely slept, my dreams haunted by Daniel's voice, calling out for help. I stopped eating, stopped answering calls from friends who only wanted to comfort me. My world had shrunk to a single burning question: what really happened to my son? Risk yet? Even as the walls closed in, a small part of me refused to give up. The contrast between those who believed me and those who didn't only fueled my determination. I clung to the hope that somewhere, somehow, Daniel was still out there and that I was the only one willing to fight for the truth. And as the family fractured around me, I realized that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones you fight alone. I reached a point where I could no longer bear the uncertainty. The blue key Daniel mentioned in his notebook became my obsession, the one thread I clung to as everything else unraveled. I scoured every inch of the house, retracing Daniel's steps, searching for any place he might have hidden something important. Days blurred together as I tore through drawers, boxes, and even the old garden shed, my hands shaking with exhaustion and hope. Then, one morning, as I was sorting through a box of Daniel's childhood keepsakes in the attic, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic wedged behind a stack of photo albums. My heart leaped as I pulled out a small blue key, its paint chipped but unmistakable. I stared at it, breathless, feeling as if Daniel himself had reached out to guide me. The key had a tiny tag attached: Locker 17, Main Street Storage. I wasted no time. My hands trembled as I drove across town, the key clutched tightly in my palm. The storage facility was nondescript, the kind of place you'd never look at twice. I found Locker 17 and with a deep breath slid the key into the lock. The door creaked open to reveal a single box. Inside I found a burner phone, a stack of documents, and a letter addressed to me in Daniel's handwriting. The letter was short but devastating. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means I had to disappear. I can't explain everything yet, but Emily isn't who she says she is. I'm alive, but I need you to trust me and not tell anyone, not even the police. I'll contact you soon. I love you." Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the letter to my chest. Relief, fear, and anger warred inside me. My son was alive. He was out there somewhere and he needed my help. But the weight of his warning pressed down on me. If I exposed the truth, I could put him in even more danger. If I stayed silent, I'd be complicit in the lie that was tearing my family apart. I sat in my car for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands, my mind racing with possibilities. I thought of Emily, of the family who doubted me, of the pain that would come if I revealed what I knew. But I also thought of Daniel, my boy, my Hartan, the promise I'd made to always protect him. In that moment, I realized the choice was mine alone. And as the sun set behind the storage facility, I knew that whatever I decided next would change all of our lives forever. The days that followed were a whirlwind of decisions and consequences. I kept Daniel's letter close, reading it over and over, searching for hidden meanings, for any clue about what he was truly facing. The relief of knowing he was alive was quickly tempered by the burden of secrecy. Every time I looked at Emily, I saw her in a new, harsher light, her careful words, her calculated grief, the way she tried to control the narrative of Daniel's death. I could no longer pretend, not even for the sake of peace. I started by quietly gathering evidence, documenting everything I'd found. The text message, the blue key, the storage locker, and Daniel's letter. I reached out to Mark, my cousin, the only one who had believed me from the start. When I showed him the letter, his eyes widened in shock, but he didn't hesitate. "We have to get him back," he said, his voice steady. Together, we began to piece together the puzzle, following the trail Daniel had left behind. Emily noticed the shift almost immediately. She confronted me one evening, her mask slipping as she demanded to know what I was hiding. I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated. "I know the truth, Emily," I said quietly, "and soon everyone else will too." For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She tried to threaten me, to twist the story, but I was done. Being afraid, with Mark's help, I contacted a private investigator, someone outside the family who could look into Emily's background without raising suspicion. The results were damning. A history of manipulation, financial fraud, and a string of aliases. It became clear that Daniel had stumbled onto something dangerous, something that forced him to disappear to protect himself and maybe even me. When I finally brought the evidence to the authorities, the fallout was immediate. Emily was questioned, her lies unraveling under the weight of proof. The family was stunned, torn between disbelief and guilt for ever doubting me. Some, like my mother, wept with relief and shame, apologizing for not trusting my instincts. Others, like Emily's parents, refused to accept the truth, their anger turning inward as their world collapsed. The process of healing was slow and uneven. Some relationships, like mine with Linda and Mark, grew stronger, forged in the fire of shared struggle. Others, especially with those who had dismissed me, remained strained, the wounds too deep to fully mend. But through it all, I found a new strength in myself, resilience I never knew I possessed. I had faced the unthinkable and refused to back down, even when it meant standing alone. Most importantly, I held on to hope. Daniel's promise to contact me kept me going, a lifeline in the darkness. I didn't know when or how he would return, but I knew he was out there, fighting his own battles. And I knew that, no matter what happened next, I had done everything in my power to protect him. In the end, it was love, messy, complicated, unwavering, that carried me through, reshaping not just my family's future, but my own. Looking back, I realize how easy it is to doubt yourself when the world insists you're wrong. Grief can cloud your judgment, but it can also sharpen your instincts in ways you never expect. I spent so many sleepless nights questioning my sanity, wondering if my love for Daniel had blinded me to reality. But in the end, it was that very love and the quiet voice inside me that refused to be silenced that led me to the truth. Family is never simple. We want to believe the best in those we love, to trust that our bonds are unbreakable. But sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hide the deepest secrets. I learned that trust isn't about blind faith. It's about listening to your intuition, even when it leads you down a lonely, difficult path. I learned that standing up for the truth can come at a cost, but the price of silence is far greater. If you're reading this and you're doubting yourself, I want you to know you are stronger than you think. Your instincts matter, even when you feel alone, even when others turn away. Your truth is worth fighting for. I don't know what the future holds for Daniel or for our family, but I do know that I will never again ignore the voice inside me that says something isn't right. In the end, I found hope in the most unlikely place, in the ashes of heartbreak, in the courage to keep searching, and in the love that refused to let go. If my story teaches you anything, let it be this: trust yourself, even in the darkest moments. Sometimes the answers you seek are waiting just beyond the edge of fear. And sometimes, believing in yourself is the bravest thing you can do.